Hi everyone, this is Blake with ChessPathways.com, and today we are going to be covering Endgame Essentials. So let's go ahead and look forward to what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be talking about what is the endgame and why should we study it? Why should we learn about the endgame? And then we're going to get into converting overwhelming positions. There's a lot of positions in chess, especially among beginners, where one side just has a lot more pieces left. They have a huge advantage, but you see beginners fail to convert these positions to wins all the time, and I don't want that to happen to you. That can be really frustrating. After this video, I'm going to give you all the tools to make sure that doesn't happen, and that when you get those huge advantages, you're able to get that win every time. We're going to learn the essential checkmates, and we're also going to talk about methods to train our skills in these areas. So what is the endgame? For our purposes here, we're going to define the endgame as the state of the board when a lot of pieces have been exchanged off, there's not too many pieces left on the board, and the game is getting close to its end. And the play in this phase of the game can be very different from how it plays in the opening of the game, and the board is cluttered with pieces, or in the middle game. Jose Capablanca, a famous, very good chess player from about 100 years ago, he was quoted as saying to study the endgame first before the opening or the middle game, because to understand your goals in the opening, you have to understand what you're going for in the middle of the game. You have to understand what positions are good, what positions are not, and what you're trying to achieve. To come up with plans in the middle game, you have to understand what endgame positions are good and which are not. But the endgame can be studied in and of itself. It can be learned independently of the other phases of the game. And the most powerful tool this is going to give you, if you're newer to chess, is it's going to help you see there's more ways to win than just the immediate checkmating attack. And that sounds kind of contradictory if you've just learned the rules of chess, because you're told the way to win is checkmate. And if that's all you know, then the only way you can win is to come up with a checkmating attack and checkmate the opponent's king. But this will help show you that if you win enough material, if you win enough of your opponent's pieces, if you know the basic endgame checkmates, you will be able to convert your material advantage into a checkmate every time. So you won't always have to play for a direct checkmating attack on the opponent's king. If you accumulate enough other advantages in the number of pieces you have or their strength, you'll be able to convert it into a win. And we're going to start talking about the very basics of that process today. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example. This is what I mean by an overwhelming position here. Let's say you have the white pieces here, you've played well the whole game, and now you're left with a queen, two rooks, a knight, and bishop, and black just has a rook, and you have the same number of pawns. Now, you'll see these kinds of positions in games between beginner players all the time. This happens so much when one player makes a mistake, loses some pieces, and you'll end up in a position like this, when one side has little or no pieces left, and the other side still has quite a bit. And just by remembering a few simple principles, you can make sure you win these games almost every time. So, the first principle of converting these positions into wins is take your time, don't rush, don't give pieces away. That's the number one way that beginners fail to convert these positions, is that probably earlier in the game, their opponent wasn't very careful and they handed them some free pieces. And if you do it right back, then you're going to throw away your advantage here. So just take your time. Remember, you don't have to find one singular plan that's going to win the game. You have plenty of time, plenty of options. No matter what move you make here, you're still completely winning. Your advantage is huge. You just have to make sure you're taking your time and you don't make mistakes. The second key principle of this type of position is that exchanges are usually going to favor the player who's winning. So if you have white in this position, it would be good if you could exchange one of your rooks for black's rook. Even though they're two pieces of equal value, that exchange is going to make your life a lot easier. This is kind of intuitive to understand if you think about a real-world battle. Imagine two armies are battling each other, and one army has 100 men, and the other army has 90 men. Those extra 10 men are an advantage, but they might not be felt for some time. The side with 90 men, they might still have a chance. But imagine if the armies exchange off 80 men each, equal trades, but now it's 20 against 10. One army has double the force of the other, they're probably going to win that battle almost every time. So even though the exchanges are equal, they favor the side who's winning, and that's true in chess too. In this position as white, for example, again, you don't have to come across one singular plan, but one plan that sticks out to me as being effective is to start by playing this move rook to d7, which does quite a few things. Not only does it threaten to pick up a free pawn and increase the size of your material advantage, but you're also threatening to bring this rook to d1 where it supports your other rook, followed by putting this rook on the 8th rank where it is supported, forcing an exchange of rooks and exchanging off black's last piece on the board. So just to show how this could play out, let's say black saves his pawn, white continues with his plan of playing rook to d1. Black can play almost anything he wants. Let's say he tries to get out of the exchange. It still doesn't work, because this will come with check and attacks the rook. So black has nothing better than to exchange off rooks, and black is left with no pieces left, except for the king. It also just so happens that if black were to choose that particular option, he actually can just get checkmated very fast. White has this queen h5 move, which is checkmate. We see the king can't go anywhere. That's incidental. That obviously won't always be there. The primary takeaway is that if we're in these positions where we have such a huge advantage, and we simply be careful, we don't throw away pieces for free, we exchange off our opponent's remaining pieces, eventually we are going to be left in a position where we have pieces remaining and our opponent does not, and then we have a very simple plan here of going around, even if the checkmate didn't exist, of going around and picking up all their pawns, marching our pawns forward and getting queens if we need them, and we will easily be able to accomplish one of the basic checkmates you're going to learn next. So let's take a look at what the result of this process might be. You had a huge advantage, you had more pieces than your opponent, you just slowly traded off pieces until your opponent was left with no pieces, and you still have a piece. In this case, it's only one piece, but you'll see how easy it is to convert this into a win. Just simply having an extra rook than your opponent in these kind of positions when your opponent has all their pieces traded off. So the simplest plan here is just to start picking up pawns. Let's come down here, and we see that because your opponent has no pieces, they have no ways to defend their pawns. So they can try temporarily, but they're quickly going to run out of ways to defend these pawns. So in these kind of positions, you just slowly pick stuff up. Black can really do whatever he wants. It doesn't really make a difference. We're winning all these pawns. Let's go ahead and defend our pawn. He can, again, move anywhere. It doesn't matter too much. Let's even just take this guy. And come take this guy. We see how easy this is. There's nothing black can do to stop us. We've won all their pawns. You don't always have to take all of them, just enough to make sure that black has absolutely no possibility of putting up a fight. And we can go ahead and make as many queens as we want. So I'm going to show you how to do a basic checkmate here. This first one is called rolling rooks. So, again, black is reduced to just making waiting moves, essentially. He can't do anything. All we're going to do is make sure that we have two pieces on the board that are either rooks or queens. So I'm just going to go ahead and make one queen, then we'll have a queen and a rook, and this checkmate will work. So we play here. Let's say black attacks our rook. Again, you just have to take your time, be careful, just move your rook away. The black king can't make any threats as long as we're careful. We're going to keep marching this pawn down the board. Let's go ahead and turn it into a queen. Now, one very, very important principle once you get to this phase of the game is make sure to avoid stalemate. If you watched my video on the rules of chess, you know what stalemate is. That's when your opponent has no legal moves. They can't move anywhere because they can't move their king into check and they don't have any other pieces that can move, but they're not in check. And remember, if that happens, your opponent can simply essentially say, well, I have no legal moves, so the game's over, it's a draw, nobody wins. And I see this happen with beginners so often here. They will accidentally stalemate the enemy king and fail to win the game. So one very, very important question to ask yourself in these kind of positions when your opponent is reduced to a bare king, always ask yourself before making any move, if I make this move, does my opponent at least have one legal move? Always ask yourself that to avoid stalemate. Now, if your move is check, you don't have to ask because it's impossible to stalemate your opponent when they're in check. If they're in check and they have no legal moves, that's not stalemate, that's checkmate. So, we're going to promote this pawn to a queen, but before we do, let's just get in that good habit. Say, if I go ahead and make a queen here, does my opponent have legal moves? And the answer is yes, of course. He has several legal moves. He can't come to our file here with the rook, but he has plenty of moves to choose from, so it's not stalemate. Let's go ahead and make the queen, and now we have achieved what we want. Once you have two pieces that are either queens or rooks, you can go ahead and do what I call, and what I've heard called before by many other players, the rolling rooks checkmate. And I'll show you how that works. It actually doesn't matter, even if our rook and queen are tucked away here in this corner doing nothing. Let's go ahead and give this king every advantage he can get. Let's put him in the center of the board. You can start this from anywhere. So here's how this works. You simply cut off one row at a time from the king. One thing not to do is to just give a bunch of random checks. I see this too among beginners sometimes. They like giving checks. It makes them feel powerful to give checks. And they go ahead and just start giving checks. This doesn't accomplish anything. When we give check, the king moves out of check, and you have to actually be careful if you do this. Can you think about what might happen that could throw away your win if you just give random checks all the time and aren't too careful? Pause your video if you want to think about it. If you watched my rules video, you'll know that I talked about this possibility and how to avoid it. Okay, if you're back with me, remember, you run the risk of achieving a threefold repetition. If you just give random checks and the same position repeats 3 times, well, your opponent can declare a draw. He can say, if the game's not making progress, the same position has repeated 3 times, the game's a draw. And that would be another really heartbreaking way to throw away this win you've worked so hard for. You've worked hard the whole game to get this position. Now it's time to convert it into a win. So just make sure that you're not going to repeat the same position 3 times. You're not going to stalemate your opponent. You're just going to slowly, methodically, and confidently convert this into a win. And I'm going to show you how with the rolling rooks technique. So let's go ahead and move this king out of check. Let's get our queen back where it was. And I'll show you a much better option than giving random checks. So the king can do whatever he wants. And the first step is simply to cut the king off along any rank or file you want. So we could decide to make this be the barrier for the king, to make sure the king can never cross this way. We could decide to make this the barrier for the king. It doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and make this the barrier for the king. Again, we're not giving check, we're just making this barrier. The king can never cross this line, we're never going to let him. So the king has to make a move. Let's say he tries to stay in the middle of the board, which is probably smart. The next step is simply to take away the next rank with your other piece. And as long as you have 2 pieces that are either a queen or a rook, this is easy. Let's just swing out here where he can't attack us, and our next move is going to be here. So he tries to stay in the center. We move here, and we see the power of the 2 pieces working together. This barrier is very big now, and he's forced back. And now you simply roll down. You see how this works. This usually isn't too hard. The king can approach. Now this is the barrier. The king is forced back once more. And now we can't do it the traditional way and take away that last row. There does happen to be a checkmate in this position, but let's just do it the rolling rooks way. Let's just swing the queen away, keep the barrier intact. We made sure that black has legal moves, right? He has a couple legal moves. He can pick whichever one, and we finally take away the final rank, and it is checkmate. This is a very useful checkmate to know. Hopefully you're starting to see how this is all coming together in terms of your bigger strategy. Because, like I mentioned, as a beginner, you're taught that the goal of chess is checkmate. You have to attack the enemy king, you have to checkmate it, that's how you win the game. But now you know that if you ever achieve that overwhelming position where you simply just have many more pieces than your opponent, you can slowly and methodically convert it to this. You can exchange off their remaining pieces, leaving you with pieces remaining and them none. Then take some of their pawns when they're completely defenseless and free, march up some pawns of your own until you have at least 2 pieces that are either a queen or a rook, and use the rolling rooks technique. And it leads to checkmate every time. You can convert that material advantage to a checkmate. Masters and experts and professional players are so familiar with this process, they've seen it happen so many times, that once it's clear what's happening, once one of these overwhelming positions occur, they don't even bother to go down this whole path, because they know it's the same every time. The player who's losing would just resign and end the game, which I don't recommend you do as a beginner. We'll talk more about resigning in future videos and why you probably shouldn't do it until you have a lot of chess experience under your belt. But it's such a methodical process, it's so reliable, it works every single time once you have that big enough advantage. Alright, so that's rolling rooks. But what if you achieve a position where you're up a lot of material? Here we have a queen and black does not, but you can't get those 2 pieces that are either rooks or queens. You only have the 1 queen, and you have no pawns left to promote. Is this still enough to win? The answer is yes. So let's go ahead and take a look. And I even gave black 2 pawns here just to make it a little more realistic of what might be a game scenario, and to show that they don't really change anything. If I was white here, my first step would probably be just to win this free H pawn, because it can't be defended. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, black has nothing to do except maybe try to wait. Maybe he'll try to push this pawn, but of course we know we don't have to let that pawn become a queen. It's very easy to defend. So let's go ahead and take this pawn. I'm not asking myself that stalemate question yet, because black still has this pawn that can move. Black's not going to run out of legal moves quite yet. So let's say he has to defend that pawn. Just to show you what I would do here, I would probably just move my king to this file, because black can never force that king out of the way. So that will stop the whole pawn queening thing forever. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, you can either begin the process of doing the checkmate now, or just go ahead and slowly pick up this pawn. Let's actually show you how to slowly pick up a pawn like this, because it happens a lot when you have more pieces than your opponent. Let's just have 2 pieces attack it, because once we have 2 pieces attacking this pawn, and black only has 1 defender, the pawn's just going to be free. So black has to move away somewhere. Our king gets in. We actually don't even need the queen's help, surprisingly. The king has to abandon the pawn because... well, no, he can move here. Let's go ahead and give check. And now we see the situation. We have two attackers. Black only has one defender, so now it is safe to take this pawn. Because the king cannot capture the queen now, because the king would take the king. And so black has to move away. And we've captured the two pawns. So I just wanted to show that with the pawns, just to emphasize that pawns, it's not going to be a big deal if you have this big of a material advantage. Let's go ahead and sit back up in our little corner. Let's give black every advantage he can get, just to prove the point that this is such a reliable checkmate that you can execute every time. Okay, so the king's in the middle of the board. So, the first way I'm going to recommend you to do this is to use the L-shape technique. So how this works is just form an L shape with the king. Get a knight's move away from the king with the queen. So here we can't do it immediately, but that's fine. Let's just cut the king off on a file and get closer. Let's say he moves here. Now he's actually in an L shape away, but it's our turn, so we have to create one. So let's just create this one, just to prove the point. Once you create this L shape with the king, you can just follow all his moves. You'll see what I mean. Let's say he moves here. We kind of mirror him. We do the same thing. And we see the beauty of this is that the king can't approach the queen, because the queen controls all these squares. He's forced to back up, and no matter what he does, he's eventually going to back himself against the wall. Let's say he goes up this way, we go up this way. He goes here, we go here. He's getting cut off into a smaller and smaller box. Let's say he goes here. Okay. Now our goal has been accomplished. The king is on one of the back ranks of the board. He's up against the wall. Now our plan has to change a little bit. We don't want to keep making L shapes the whole way. Think about why it might be a bad idea to just blindly make L shapes now. If we keep using the L shape technique, what's going to happen? We're going to force him all the way to the corner, and now he has no legal moves. This is stalemate, and I've seen a lot of beginners throw away wins they've worked hard for this way, so you don't want to do that. Remember, just use the L-shape technique to force him onto the back rank. And even then, you have to be a little careful. Let's say he doesn't step onto the back rank yet, so you're still using the L-shape technique, and now he does. Again, you can't move here. That would be stalemate. So be very careful. Always ask yourself that question in the endgame when your opponent has just the bare king. So let's go back a few moves. Let's say he steps onto the back rank. So, phase 1, use the L shape, push the king to the back rank. What's step 2? Keep him there. Very simple. Notice how I haven't given any checks. Like I said, a lot of players like to give those checks. You don't need to give checks. I'm just cutting the king off. The king can never leave this back rank, and he's forced to just shuffle there. Okay, now we're done moving the queen for now. Now our king has to help. The queen can't do it all by herself. So let's move this king closer to the king. Try to get as close as you can, and this is the ideal setup. The king's pinned on one of the back ranks or files, the queen is on the second one, and your king is on the third one. And what this supports is that now, once your king supports the square on top of your opponent's king, you have a very simple checkmate, just like this. All you need is the king's support, and the queen just kind of smushes the king against the wall here, and it's checkmate. So this is the technique I learned when I was learning chess. I actually think there's another method that's a little more complicated. You might find it a little harder, but I actually am going to recommend learning it this way because it's going to help you with the next basic checkmate. So let's go ahead and get back to this situation where our pieces are kind of far from the king. Let's even, what was the last move here? It's black's turn. Let's put him even closer to the center. And I'll show you how to do it another method. So here's how this one works. We're going to cut off the king, just like rolling rooks, right? Cut off the king, form this barrier. Don't let him advance. Again, you can pick whatever barrier you want. You can start with that barrier. You can start with this way and push him this way. Whatever you want. Just form a barrier close to the king. So, let's go ahead and play this. The next step is to get your king close to the enemy king. Again, using that same kind of setup. The king's on one rank or file, your queen's on the second cutting it off, and your king is on the next one. And the goal here is to do what I call getting the opponent king to step over your king. Get them lined up. So they are currently lined up, but it's black's turn. So let's say black moves here. Your goal is to have black either move back or step where your king is. So you don't want to move your king right now. You want black to have the option to step on you, basically. That's what I always call it when the kings are lined up. So just waste a move. Move your queen somewhere. Now, black can either shuffle on this same rank, or he can move back. If he moves back, what do you think we do? We move the barrier closer. We continue cutting that king off further. So let's say the king moves sideways. Well, we give him the option to step on top of us again, to line up the kings. Again, he can either step on top, he can move back, or he can keep shuffling. Let's just say he steps over you so you can see my point. Now, the king is forming a barrier. The king is forming this barrier because the king controls all these squares, and so now the queen doesn't have to do her job on this rank anymore. She can move to the next one. So even though we don't have the rook and queen, we're still getting the desired effect. We're getting this 2-rank barrier set up and forcing the king back. So let's have the king step back. And here we just give the king the choice to step on top of us. And here the king actually has no choice. The king either has to step back, or the king has to step on top of our king and let the king form the barrier. And once again, the king gets pushed back. And what I like about this method also, not only does it help with the next checkmate we're going to learn, you don't have to do anything different on the back rank. This works all the way down. Just make sure there's no stalemates and you're good to go. So let's say the king moves here. We'll give him the choice to step on top of us. Let's say this time he wisens up and tries to avoid it. Well, again, do we give check? No, that ruins the work we're doing. The king gets to step back up and we lose the barrier we made. All we do is shuffle the king, give the king the choice to step on top of us again or not. Let's say again he doesn't. We just give him the choice again, and now the king can't go anywhere. The king's out of choices. He either has to step backwards or step right on top of our king. And once he does, we know what'll happen. The king forms this barrier, the queen's free to move to the next rank, and the king is forced back. And here we go. We give the king the choice. The king will try to avoid it, but we will keep giving him the choice. Finally, he has to, and again, make sure every one of those moves it's not stalemate. King has to, and queen to the back rank. Same method as all the other ranks. And this time it's checkmate. The king has nowhere to go and is in check. Now, here's why I taught this method. Because it works great with the rook too. The rook and the king is enough to checkmate the king as well, and the same method works. Let's just do it, the other way this time. We cut off the king, we form this barrier. Again, if the king moves back, we just move the barrier closer, so let's have him try to stay as close to the center as possible. And we just give him the choice to step over our king. So he doesn't, we insist, we chase him as far as he wants. He probably doesn't want to get too close to this edge either, although it wouldn't change, we don't have to change our technique if he does. There's faster checkmates, like we could cut him off here now, but let's just keep going. We've made the decision to push him this way, let's just go with it. We see now that the king, again, has to make a choice. He's out of room to keep backing up. He either has to step on top of our king or back up. Let's go ahead and have him step on top. We'll give check. King goes here, and we give him the choice to step on top of our king. There's a minor annoyance here. He can go ahead and approach the rook. That's the only difference with the rook instead of the queen, is that he can get all the way here and approach the rook. So let's say he does. Again, he doesn't want to step on our king because he knows that gets him pushed back. So let's say he starts running along this file. We keep giving him the choice to step on top of our king, and he eventually reaches our rook. Okay, so we can't step here now because he would take our rook. That would be very bad. But you just simply swing to the other side. You maintain the barrier. So let's say he starts going the other way. This is the key position to remember. Can you pause the video here and think about what you play? This is important. So you don't want to move the king here. I know a lot of players make this move because they think the kings, it's good to line the kings up. That's kind of the whole point of the method. But you need it to be your turn when the kings are lined up. It does you no good if it's black's turn when the kings are lined up. So if you move here, black just starts running the other way and, well, you didn't achieve anything. You want black to have the choice to step on top of you, which he currently does. You would love it to just be black's turn here. This is what you're going for. You want it to be black's turn and him having the choice to step on top of your king. So what I would do is just waste a move. Maintain this barrier. And now the king cannot go reach your rook again. This is how you stop the king from reaching your rook, because if he tries to go that way and reach your rook, what happens? He has to step on top of your king and gets pushed back. So let's say he goes here. You give him the choice to step on top of your king. He goes and annoys your rook, but you just move away. And he tries to stay in the middle. And we waste a move, right? And we stay on this side just because that stops him from coming to approach our rook again, because he would have to step on top of the king and get pushed back. He can attack our rook, but again, we know that's no big deal. We just maintain the barrier. So let's have him come here, and let's just give the king the choice to step on top of us. I would move here, because now he can't approach our rook, right? Because he would have to step on top of the king. But just to prove the point one more time, we can do it the other way. We can give him the choice to step on top of us this way. Again, notice that I'm not moving here. I don't want to step on top of the king myself, because that doesn't achieve anything. we want to give him the choice to step on top of our king. So let's say he runs towards the rook. We keep giving him the choice to come here and get checkmated. We swing the rook to the other side. Now he has the choice to step on our king. That's what we want. We want it to be black's turn, so we just waste a move. Now, if he comes here, it's checkmate, right? So here, we give him the choice. Here, we give him the choice. And finally, he only has one legal move and gets checkmated. So this method works with either a rook or a queen. Very good checkmate to memorize. This will come in handy many times throughout your chess career. So let's recap what we learned today and talk about methods to train yourself in these essential skills. So we talked about why it's important to study the endgame. Because remember, if you do so well in the opening and middle game and get one of these huge advantages, it does you no good if you don't know how to convert that into a win. Then we talked about how to win those overwhelming positions where you can just slowly and methodically keep playing safe moves, exchange pieces. Suddenly, even exchanges, pieces of equal value being exchanged, are good for you because it gets you closer and closer to that kind of position where your opponent just runs out of pieces. Then, it's very easy to go run some pawns up the board, make at least 2 pieces that are queens and rooks, and do the rolling rooks checkmate. And even if that's not available, even if you only have 1 piece that's a queen or a rook, you even know how to do that checkmate now based on the technique we just have here on the board. Now, how to practice this? This is actually one area of chess where computers can be very helpful. I see a lot of players who are, they're still beginners, they're still coming up, and they try to use computers to analyze openings, do all these other things. That might have limited value. But when it comes to this area of chess, the area of winning positions, computers can actually be very helpful because computers play very strong, right? They don't make a whole lot of mistakes, if any. So it shouldn't matter how good your opponent is once your position is this overwhelming. You want to be able to practice converting that into a win against even a computer that's going to play really well. If you have a friend who's willing to do this with you, it's a good exercise. So either on the computer or with a friend, just practice setting up positions on the board where you have a big advantage, where you have many more pieces than your opponent. And either against the computer or against a friend who's studying with you, just practice converting those into wins. Also practice these basic checkmates we talked about. Set up a position where you just have a king and a rook, and your opponent or a computer just has the king. And make sure you can do this until you can do it in your sleep. It's very important to make sure that this is solidified. And remember to ask that stalemate question. Make sure that you're not ever stalemating your opponent. It would be, very bad to be going to a chess tournament. You finally take that leap and go to a tournament. You work for multiple hours to get a winning position. You get it down to a queen against a king and queen against a king, or a king and rook against a king, and you throw away all that hard work because of stalemate. So do the work now. Practice this. It's very important, and you will see a lot of chess success if you can master these fundamentals. So, as always, thank you very much for watching and taking that first step towards mastering the endgame. It's always a pleasure to be able to provide this information to you. Please check out my new site, my new project, Chess Pathways, at chesspathways.com. I want to be able to help players improve at chess, to overcome their hurdles, and become the best chess players they can be. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.